The sleek presentation hall of Nova Aerospace buzzed with tension. 200 of Detroit's top engineers, corporate heads, and selected journalists crowded the auditorium, their attention locked on the scene playing out on stage. At the center stood Camille Brooks, 35 years old, clad in a plain white button-down and faded denim jeans, looking entirely out of place among the blazers and lab coats. Within her stirred the R7000 jet engine, a $2 million feat of engineering that had baffled Nova's elite MIT-trained crew for over 72 hours. Raymond Knox, the firm's CEO, gripped the mic with dramatic flair, his tone laced with mockery. "This woman claims she can join our elite engineering ranks. No diploma, no background, just fantasies." He tossed a wrench near Camille's feet, the clatter echoing off the polished stage. "You have 30 minutes to fix what my brightest team couldn't. Fail, and you're gone." Laughter rippled across the room. Camille reached down, picked up the wrench with shaky hands, a flicker of buried pain in her brown eyes. But they had no idea who she truly was. What choice would you make in Camille's shoes? Stand tall or walk away? At times, true power lies in deciding when to reveal your full story. Comment your thoughts below. Can quiet dignity rise above loud arrogance? Camille Brooks lived in a humble flat on Detroit's East End, where factory clatter mixed with midnight winds sneaking through thin walls. Every day, at 5 a.m. sharp, she brewed black coffee in a chipped mug and sat beside her window overlooking the industrial blocks, where she shut the thought down, forcing it back. Her neighbors knew her as the reserved woman who worked at the community library, shelving titles and helping local kids with homework. She wore plain white shirts from clearance racks, the same scuffed sneakers each day, and kept her brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail. No rings, no lipstick. Mrs. Whitaker from next door often told the others Camille seemed kind, but there was a sadness in her, something broken she carried like unseen baggage. What Mrs. Whitaker didn't know was that Camille had recently applied at Nova Aerospace, Michigan's leading aviation company. Not as lead engineer or principal designer, roles that might have been hers by merit long ago, but as a basic technician, the kind of job fresh grads usually take. When asked about her background in the interview, she was intentionally vague. Education, hands-on learning. Past work, various auto shops in Detroit, mostly car repairs. Mark Delaney, the recruiter, had looked her over with doubt, unsure why someone her age wanted such an entry-level role. No formal credentials, no documented training. Camille had met his gaze calmly. Sometimes passion outweighs paperwork. But the practical test told another story. The way she read engine troubles by sound alone, how her hands worked across components with a precision that showed deep experience. She wrapped up the task in half the given time, diagnosing problems even senior techs hadn't caught. Word traveled fast through Nova Aerospace's headquarters about the unknown woman with no formal background but astonishing skill. The murmurs reached Raymond Knox himself, and his response was swift and visceral. Absurd, he had snapped during Monday's board meeting. No untrained woman could outperform my MIT professionals. His ego couldn't handle it. Refused to. So this staged assessment wasn't to test Camille's skills. It was designed to disgrace her publicly, to demonstrate that real engineering belonged only to the highly credentialed and male. Camille knew the truth, had sensed it the second the offer arrived, and yet she showed up carrying truths that would destroy every assumption in that auditorium. 5 years earlier, in Houston, Texas, the Johnson Space Center's main hall had lit up with flashes and celebration. Dr. Camille Brooks, only 30, stood proudly at the podium in a sharp navy suit that highlighted her refined presence. She'd just been named the youngest chief engineer in Orion's program at NASA. Her radical propulsion model had cut fuel use by 40%, while increasing output by 60%. Dr. Brooks hasn't just supported our Mars mission, the NASA director had said to roaring applause. She's redrawn the limits of aerospace possibility. Camille's eyes scanned the crowd for the one person whose presence mattered more than the praise. Daniel Walsh, her fiancé and fellow researcher, grinned from the front row. They had built the technology side by side, sacrificing countless nights in the lab, building both dreams and trust. Tomorrow they would sign the joint patent. The next week, they'd marry in a small ceremony with their NASA team present. But that night, everything fractured like pressure-tested alloy. Camille returned to the lab for her notebook and found Daniel at her workstation, downloading everything onto external drives. "Daniel, what's happening?" Her voice trembled between disbelief and fear. He turned with zero remorse, no sign of shame. "I'm doing what should have been done months ago. Lockhart Martin offered $50 million. For me alone." The words struck like punches. "This is our research. It belongs to NASA. You can't—" His cold laugh cut her off. "Our work? Come on. You think anyone actually believes a 30-year-old woman made this? You were the pretty face, sweetheart." The betrayal hurt more than any wound ever could. 5 years of shared goals, secrets whispered after long experiments, late-night lab breakthroughs. It had all been an illusion. Daniel had planned it perfectly, capturing records to frame himself as a genius, leaving her portrayed as a supporting role. When she tried stopping him from leaving with the stolen data, he triggered a bogus alert accusing her of theft. In the mayhem, Daniel sabotaged safety systems, destroying key files. The resultant blast left Camille with nerve damage in her right hand, the one that had drawn her designs, constructed models, reached for discovery. 6 months of inquiries followed, but Daniel had been too careful. Falsified emails, doctored security footage, and bribed testimonies from co-workers he'd spent years grooming. Camille was cast as a traitor, dismissed in silence by NASA to avoid scandal. But the worst pain wasn't losing her reputation or even her hand. It was realizing Daniel had been recruited by Lockhart all along, planted to infiltrate NASA's rising star. "You were ideal," he'd told her during one of the hearings, as casually as discussing weather. Smart enough to invent what they needed, naive enough to trust completely. Her legacy now bore someone else's name, her vision buried under betrayal and corporate theft. The night Camille left Houston, she boxed up her MIT doctorate, NASA honors, and the ring she never got to wear. In that empty apartment, she made her choice. No court fights, no pleas for justice from a system that equated truth with titles. She would vanish, become no one, someone who might find peace in anonymity. But now, 5 years later, facing the engine Daniel had stolen, the past returned like a storm. The crowd in Nova Aerospace's hall grew louder with anticipation. The tension in the air crackled. Raymond Knox strutted like a showman across the stage, reveling in what he expected would be Camille's undoing. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed theatrically, "this is why Nova only hires the top tier, the certified, the proven, the deserving." His eyes locked on Camille with hungry smugness. "Miss Brooks thinks she can earn a place here. No degrees, no official record, just misplaced belief." The crowd chuckled with sharp-edged mirth. James Morrison, the engineering director, stepped up, his class ring glinting. "This is pointless," he muttered. "She's just another dreamer with a Wi-Fi connection." Sarah Lynn, lead systems engineer, chimed in. "I saw her file. Library assistant tinkering on cars and alleys. This isn't playtime. It's aerospace." Her tone oozed the elitism Camille had once debated away, back when she had proof to fight with. Now, stripped of titles and defense, she stood alone before their doubt. A young engineer, maybe 25 with a brand new MIT credential, pointed at Camille's slightly shaken right hand. "She's trembling already. I bet she's never seen a real turbine up close." Laughter rang out, phones clicked on, journalists took notes, priming headlines about the foolish outsider who dared challenge Detroit's tech royalty. The RS-7000 holds a major flaw," Raymond went on, gesturing dramatically to the massive engine. "Our top minds, everyone Ivy trained, spent 3 days on it. Miss Brooks gets 30 minutes. He let the silence stretch. "When she fails, and she will, we'll remind others like her where they truly belong." As her fingertips met the engine's cold frame, memory surged through her. Late nights at Johnson, the thrill of invention, the hope that pushed her beyond limits, and Daniel's hands guiding hers, not in support, but to own, to steal. Clock's ticking. Sarah sneered. "Need help opening the casing, or should we call a real engineer?" The room roared again, but Camille was already inspecting, and what she saw chilled her to the core. This wasn't just similar to her Orion design. It was her design, twisted and altered by someone who had no grasp of its core principles. The harmonic frequency was off, the compression balance misaligned. At cruising altitude, the engine would suffer catastrophic failure. Whoever sold this version, whether Daniel directly or through shady corporate channels, had put a flying death trap into the sky. 20 minutes, Raymond called out cheerfully. "I assume you know which end goes forward." More chuckles, more phones recording. But Camille's thoughts were already lost in equations, probabilities, consequences. She could tell them the truth now, reveal who she really was and what this machine truly represented. But, looking at their eager expressions, hungry for her downfall, she understood they wouldn't believe a word of it. Not unless she proved it, with skill no backyard mechanic could fake. The young MIT grad stepped in closer, emboldened by her silence. Maybe she's praying, "Hey, lady, this is engineering, not Sunday service. Metal doesn't care about your prayers." Camille's hand paused on the engine. For 5 years she had buried herself from this world and everything it reminded her of: grief, betrayal, erasure. But now, face to face with a warped version of her legacy that could end lives, she had a choice. Let ego win and walk away, or speak up and risk the quiet life she had painfully rebuilt. 20 minutes gone. Camille's hands had moved across every inch of the corrupted engine, her mind ticking through each variance from her blueprint. The crowd's ridicule peaked, but she barely heard it anymore. Her right hand, damaged in the lab explosion Daniel caused, cramped under pressure. The nerve damage made a detailed motion difficult, every precise adjustment a silent triumph over limitation. 10 minutes left, Raymond Knox announced with delight. "Looks like Miss Brooks just realized fixing a Corolla isn't the same as building aircraft." Camille lowered her tools and stepped away from the engine. A hush fell, all anticipating her surrender. She reached into her pocket, fingers wrapping around the worn NASA pin she still carried, its metal surface dulled by 5 years of silent handling. Its inscription caught the light. Ad astra per aspera, to the stars through hardship. In that moment, before 200 people who saw her as a nobody, Camille remembered the child she once was, eyes lifted to the sky as the shuttle launched from Cape Canaveral. That girl had sworn she'd build the engines that would one day touch Mars. She remembered her father's words the night before MIT. "Camille, you were born to fly. Don't let anyone cut your wings." But mostly, she remembered her NASA team, the brilliant men and women who trusted her, worked beside her, believed in the dream they all shared. They deserved more than to see their work turned into a dangerous imitation. The dream deserved more. "Are you quitting?" Sarah Lynn's voice sliced through her thoughts, steeped in smugness. "We don't have time for your little dramatic pause." Camille glanced through the conference room window at Detroit's gray skyline. Somewhere beyond those clouds lay the vast unknown she once aimed for. She could still walk away, go back to her quiet library life, leave the past buried. But if this engine took flight and failed, if lives were lost because she chose silence over truth, how would she live with herself? Her father had taught her that doing right wasn't about applause. It was about standing firm even when no one was watching. 5 minutes, Raymond's voice echoed. Time to accept what we all know. Camille turned around slowly, and something in her eyes made the front row instinctively step back. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that even Raymond didn't interrupt. I need a digital micromotor and a high-precision pressure calibration kit. Matsuo and Fluke models only. The shift in her tone was so sharp, so absolute, that audible gasps broke the silence. Unless, she added, eyes sharp, you want this thing detonating at 40,000 feet. James Morrison's face twisted in disbelief. What did you say? Explode? But Camille had already turned back to the engine. Despite her damaged hand, she moved with expert speed, breaking down the regulator system in 30 seconds flat, something Nova's MIT engineers hadn't done in 3 days. Right here, she said, pointing to a near-invisible flaw, her voice crisp with certainty. The resonance alignment is off from the compression threshold. At altitude, the resulting vibration would cause collapse in the combustion unit. Complete failure in minutes. Sarah Lynn stepped forward, face pale. That's not possible. How could you even guess the harmonic values of— Because, Camille interrupted without looking up, this is a hacked Orion engine design. Someone copied it without understanding the core math. The ratio must be 14.7 to 1, not 15.2 like it is now. Raymond Knox stood frozen. Orion? As in NASA's Orion? His voice was hollow. How would you even— But Camille didn't respond. She was deep in repairs, rattling off specs with cold precision. Fuel delay, 23.7 microseconds. Turbine spin, 97,300 RPM. Bypass ratio, 5.1 to 1. Each figure was exact, inaccessible unless one had either internal NASA clearance or was the person who engineered it. The crowd stood in stunned silence as Camille recalibrated the entire system with movements so fluid they resembled choreography. The young MIT engineer who had earlier mocked her now stood frozen, mouth ajar. This wasn't someone who fixed carburetors in a backyard. This was elite, bleeding-edge mastery, the kind born only from years on the aerospace frontier. Done, Camille declared, setting her tools down. She initiated diagnostics, and the engine fired to life, its tone so precise it seemed melodic. Every readout flashed green. Optimal conditions. Who are you? James Morrison's voice cracked. Camille wiped her hands on a cloth, then faced the crowd. Her right hand, once trembling, now steady. Her eyes unwavering. I'm the person who warned NASA about this exact failure mode 5 years ago, when I designed the first Orion engine. The words struck the room like a shockwave. Impossible, Sarah Lynn blurted, her voice shrill. The Orion engine was created by Dr. Camille Brooks, and she's dead, vanished, disgraced. Camille's laugh was dry, joyless, full of pain. I'm standing right here. You just never looked past your assumptions. She rolled up her sleeve. Her right arm bore the scars, deep, branching from wrist to elbow, undeniable remnants of the fire that had changed everything. The explosion that ended her NASA career was etched in raised white scars across her arm, an eternal signature of betrayal. In the third row, an elderly journalist slowly rose to his feet. His voice shook, his eyes wide with dawning recognition. Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, the prodigy who was going to take us to Mars. Eleanor nodded once. Simple, quiet, unmistakable. And, in that single gesture, she shattered 200 carefully constructed illusions. Chaos erupted. Cameras flashed like strobes, phones rang, journalists barked into microphones with urgency. Richard Sterling gripped the podium like it was the last thing tethering him to reality. This can't be real, he whispered, face drained of color. The record said you were— Daniel Walsh reported that you had— Daniel Walsh. Eleanor repeated the name like a curse. The man who sold my design to Lockheed Martin for $50 million. And apparently, Lockheed sold it to you, Mr. Sterling. She moved to the computer terminal and typed a series of commands. The screen filled with blueprints, the original Orion design, each page marked with embedded code signatures. EM NASA 2019. This, she said, gesturing to the screen, is proof that your RS-7000 is an illegal derivative of my work. She held up her phone. On its display, legal documentation. And this is a cease and desist from my attorneys. Sterling Aerospace is facing a $500 million patent infringement lawsuit. Sterling collapsed into his chair like a marionette with its strings cut. But Eleanor's next words silenced the room even more than the lawsuit. However, I'm not filing it. Dead quiet. I didn't come here for revenge or money. I came because I recognized my own design, corrupted into something that could kill innocent people. She looked directly into the nearest camera. 5 years ago, I let love blind me to betrayal. I lost everything to one man's greed. But today, I choose not to let the past define my future. Today, I fix what's broken and walk away. Eleanor faced Richard Sterling. He looked like he'd aged a decade in mere minutes. The engine is repaired, she said calmly. My consulting fee is $1, the price of a cup of coffee, because engineering excellence shouldn't be measured by ego or gender, but by its ability to save lives. She turned to the room. 200 people who had come to watch her fail, now watching her redefine everything they thought they knew. You want to know who I really am? She asked. I'm someone who believes talent doesn't live in diplomas or in pedigree. It lives in passion, in persistence, in the courage to keep going when the world tells you you're not enough. She gathered her canvas bag. The hall remained still, frozen in a stunned reverence. Sarah Chen's voice broke the silence, thick with regret. Wait, please, I'm so sorry. What we did was unforgivable. Eleanor paused at the edge of the stage. Sorry doesn't change the past, Sarah, but it might change what happens next. James Morrison stepped forward, removing his MIT ring as if it burned. Dr. Mitchell, please stay. Sterling Aerospace needs someone like you. We'll offer any position, any salary. Eleanor shook her head gently. What you need isn't me. What you need is a new culture, one that doesn't reject people because they didn't graduate from the right school or look the part. She gestured toward the repaired engine, now humming in perfection. That machine doesn't care about your prejudices. Neither should you. Richard Sterling finally found his voice. A whisper, barely audible. I'll make this right. I'll restore your reputation, ensure everyone knows the truth. Then do something that matters, Eleanor replied. Open doors for the next Eleanor, the one sitting in a garage right now, dreaming of something extraordinary, and being told she's not enough. A young reporter hesitantly raised her hand. Dr. Mitchell, where will you go now? Surely NASA. I'm going back to the library, Eleanor said, where I help kids from overlooked neighborhoods fall in love with science, where an 8-year-old girl can dream of Mars without being told she's the wrong gender or the wrong class. The crowd parted as she walked to the exit, no longer an object of ridicule, but of awe. At the doorway, she turned one final time, the sunlight outlining her silhouette. Someone once called me decorative window dressing. Pretty, but useless, she said softly. But every flower has thorns, and sometimes thorns are necessary to protect the beauty within. And with that, she stepped into the Detroit afternoon, leaving behind the wreckage of assumptions, egos, and institutions. Sarah Chen sank into a seat, tears falling as she stared at the same hands that had once pointed and mocked a legend. James Morrison removed his MIT diploma from the wall, realizing its weight meant nothing without the humanity behind it. Richard Sterling stood motionless beside a $2 million engine, saved by the woman he tried to humiliate, his empire of arrogance crumbling around him. The elderly journalist scribbled one final line in his notebook. Today, I witnessed the loudest silence I've ever heard, the moment dignity defeated arrogance without raising its voice. Outside, Eleanor Mitchell disappeared into the crowd, not running from the past, but walking into a future she had reclaimed. Monday would find her back at the library, planting seeds of wonder in young minds the world often overlooked. And maybe, just maybe, one of them would be the next revolutionary. Because some battles aren't won with power. They're won with integrity. Eleanor didn't destroy the people who tried to break her. She simply showed them who she really was. And that changed everything. But walking into a future she had